Hi, and welcome back from lunch. Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Anargia Vardana. I'm an investor at Maveron. Maveron is a consumer-only venture capital firm. We are hyper-focused on finding and investing in breakout consumer tech companies, seed and Series A. And I have my esteemed panelists here today, really excited to moderate this and to share a little bit more about innovation and how we're thinking about it from a venture and VC perspective. So we will jump straight in, and I ask that my panelists introduce themselves when they go through the questions to start. So the first question I have for you is, how do you think through tough problems? When you're innovating, do you think solo? Do you think group? What's the process? Anyone feel free to jump in and answer a little bit about that.
Well, I do think the wisdom of teams is better than the wisdom of solos if you can get around it. But I also think that when it comes to tough problems in entrepreneurship, it's different than, let's say, tough problems in physics. So when it comes to entrepreneurship, the worst decision is indecision, where the most difficult decisions are 55-45, and what you need to do is think about what's the best path to develop a system where you're going to learn, knowing that there's this iteration continually on what you're doing. And so two things around how that might be related to gender, I mean, to the extent that this is a conference where we're talking about gender. The first is, and can I give a little bit of background about myself, or should I do that? Because I don't know if people know who we are. So I wear, and this will give you context about how I'm answering this question. I wear 3 hats. I run 3 different programs or initiatives, all of which I co-lead with a female co-director. So I'm here because I run Alchemist, which is a venture-backed accelerator for enterprise startups. The co-managing director with Alchemist is Danielle D'Agostoro, and we focus on funding females, or not females, but males and females, but we have funded 36 female CEOs in the enterprise space, in the B2B space. I also teach entrepreneurship in the engineering school at Stanford, and that class was co-taught with Heidi Roizen, who's also terrific, and now I co-teach it with Emily Ma, who's one of the leaders of Google X. And then I also run a networking series of events called the Influencer Series, and the co-director of that is Michelle Gonzalez, who used to be an EIR at Apple for 7 years. So the context for this is that every initiative that I've done that I've succeeded at has been with a co-founder, and that co-founder just happens to be a woman. Okay, and that's been, and it's not because I'm choosing a co-founder because the co-founder's a woman, but because we make better decisions because we're orthogonal in our viewpoints. We're generally teams that are very complementary. So, in terms of tough problems, 2 insights. The first is that MIT did a study on measuring group IQ with solving tough problems versus individual IQ, and there were 2 takeaways. The first is that group decision-making trumps individual decision-making when it comes to coming to the right answer. And the second takeaway was that groups actually with women perform better than and the study was absolute in its recommendation, which meant that every additional female on that team led that group to having a better outcome than not having a woman on that team. So it was so absolute that it said that if you had to choose between a team which was all women versus all women plus 1 man, it was better to have all women. But that study was, and the reason why was because for whatever reason, when you're in a group dynamic, the female-centric teams tended to share, there was more participation, and there was more shared learning, whereas the male teams tended not be equal distribution. So, for us, when we try to make tough decisions, what we're trying to do is 2 things. Get participation from many different viewpoints and make decisions quickly, because we know that you're not going to get you'll get to a pretty quick point where you get all the feedback, and then you just need to act and iterate. And I think you falter if you do either. If you don't do either. If you either make a decision without getting enough inputs, or you take too long to make a decision. And so when we have a very tough decision, one thing that we recommend doing, especially if you're in a group where you feel like you can't participate, is we go for a walk. Because when you go for a walk, if there is somebody who's dominating conversations, just the physical act of walking, you can't keep talking. You'll get tired. So there's something about ensuring equal participation amongst everybody and then making a decision and then setting up a feedback loop to learn. So let me just stop there because I know that was a bunch of stuff. But I would say involve a lot of different viewpoints quickly, make a decision, and then set up a feedback mechanism to learn.
That's great. Hi, everyone. I'm SC Moadi. So just like Ravi, I wear multiple hats. I'm an investor, managing partner of a venture firm called Mighty Capital. We fund companies that have already reached product market fit and look for a little bit of extra funding before raising a larger Series B or Series A. I'm also a expert in mobile and tech. I wrote a book on mobile. I give a lot of talks. I teach mobile and investing at Stanford. And then I'm also running a community of innovators called Products That Count. And we have programs here in San Francisco, in New York, London, productsthatcount.com. Anyway, so to your question, I think that whether you're solo or you're part of a team, you can make stuff happen, but you need to keep in mind different frameworks. It doesn't necessarily matter. I'm like Ravi, I prefer the team approach, but the solo approach works just as well. So my recommendations for a team approach is to find people that are compatible with you. And by that, I mean three things very specifically. One is a complementary skill set. Two is compatible communication style. And three is a same appetite for risk, especially important if you're starting a company. So how I came up with those criteria, it sounds simple. I used to run an organization called Founder Dating, which I started, which is a network of professional matchmaking for company founders. And through that experience, I interviewed literally thousands of founders, trying to find a co-founder for them. Hidden agenda was I was looking for a co-founder for myself, and I got first pick at everything. That's the solo approach, which I will talk about in a minute. But through all these interviews and meeting and trying to understand the goals of all these founders, I learned that you want, like I said, complementary skill set, right? People who do different things, so they're not going to fight for the same piece of meat. Similar appetite for risk, very, very important when you start a company. If somebody wants to have a quick exit, somebody wants to go IPO, and an offer comes in between, you're going to fight it out, so you want the same appetite for risk. And then compatible communication style. Those are very practical advice if you work as a team. If you work solo, you can also be very successful. What you want to do there is you really want to raise and build a personal brand. And that takes a whole lot of work. And the approach that I recommend here is a 3-step approach where, the first thing you want to do is if you pick a topic, you say, I want to become an expert in, artificial intelligence, right? So the first thing you want to do is join the conversation. You'll be surprised how many people tell you they want to be, starting a company in artificial intelligence, and all they do is read the news or go to events. That's not being part of the conversation. When I decided I was going to be part of the conversation of the mobile revolution, my first step was I'm going to tweet one article a day. It sounds really easy. Actually, to tweet one article a day, you need to find one article a day. It means you need to read a lot more than one article a day. And all of a sudden, you start to really express yourself. You join the conversation. The next step after that is you want to start shaping the conversation. So once you are part of it, you retweet these articles. All of a sudden, you start to have an opinion. I like what they say in point 1, 2, and 3, but on number 4, I would change it this way or that way. The way that I did that New Year resolution was I want to be on one panel every month so that I can, on a given topic, express my opinions. And then the third step is once you've joined and started to shape the conversation, then you can drive the conversation. My resolution for that was to write a book, give keynotes. You can do that in lots of different ways. But if you are systematic about this, you can be very successful at making stuff happen as a solo entrepreneur or solo brand.
Thank you. And let me guide a little bit, Joseph, for the next topic. Around decision making, founders, entrepreneurs are making a ton of decisions and coming up with a lot of ideas. Sometimes they're the first person to come up with this idea, and you work a lot with hardware. How important is it to be the first person? Is it better to be the second person? Do you have to be correct all the time? How do you think through that?
All right, so let me start out a little bit background about Lab 360. We're basically a startup accelerator or incubator ourselves. We started about three years ago in 2014. One of the things is, if you look at my background, is I have a very strong, I grew up with basically PCs to mobile products. So to differentiate, and Lab 360 actually is backed by a China-based company called Qihoo 360. It was listed on NYSE since 2012. So when we decided to do the incubator and specifically focus on the hardware, a lot of it's leveraging what we know. And I've done two startups from scratch. They're very, very challenging. And I did two startups in NEC and also Silicon Graphics with a lot more resources. So while I try to guide these startups, we have now 20 startups in our portfolio. It is to apply some of the operation knowledge to help them to guide them through the steps. Because I think nothing can replace the real-life learning experience. But sometimes you don't have to learn the simple stuff. So in terms of being the first to market, as everybody know, I mean, Apple did not invent the first MP3 player, so they are a fast follower. And somebody asked me a question about, is China, tech companies in China, are they innovators or they just a bunch of copycats? And I think you have to look in specific situation where different innovations happens. So in terms of, and then you have to look at the team. So one of the things, for hardware, I've seen a lot of teams that focus on, mainly on their software background. They just use standardized, commercial off-the-shelf Arduino boards, and they make something and think that. But the thing is, the hardware doesn't have substantial barrier entry. So that's just like fitness band, right? So ended up the company that did raised the most money and did the most fundraising ended up winning the game. And then now you look at Fitbit and Garmin, they incorporate more core technology where they can actually track your blood pressure and other type of things. And then they can continue to substantiate to extend the lead. So I always look at, so if you go to a Lab 360 website, we don't have a standardized 6-month program. We actually look at each startup when they come in, where they are at, what the idea, what the major next milestone is, and then we establish a tailored program for them.
Great, thank you. And piggybacking off of that, a phrase we often hear is, she was ahead of her time, he was ahead of their time, or this company was ahead of their time. Ravi, if you can talk a little bit about a founder, a team, a company being a little bit ahead of the time. Do you have to be? Do you get punished for being that innovator and being that pioneer? If you are, how do you navigate that? How do you tell your story so people catch up with you?
Yes, that's a really good question. I would say most ideas are good ideas. Okay, so very rarely do we see a company pitch us and say, that's just a bad idea. So you're not going to get faulted for having generally a bad idea. The issue is always timing. And I think that is something that all the top venture capitalists are always thinking about is this the time for you to actually take off? Now, your job as a founder, ultimately, the academic definition of entrepreneurship is it's the pursuit of opportunity beyond resources controlled, which is a fancy way of saying your currency is the vision of what you're doing, and you're trying to convert that currency to attract investors to fund you, to attract talent to join you, and so forth. Somebody who is ahead of their time, so I'll give you an example. We have two actually interesting counterpoint companies, but we don't have a lot of time in this panel. One company that we had that graduated from Alchemist is called Rigetti, and they're building a quantum computer. Okay, so quantum computing, most people, most VCs, when they see that, they'll say, oh, that's ahead of your time. That is something that's not going to happen for 5 to 10 years, and so I'm just going to wait. And you're going to, is this being recorded? But one of my co-teachers at Stanford has this phrase for VCs that are really nice to you, but actually are punting, and she calls it grin fucking, where your VCs are going to be like, oh, that's a great idea. I really love this. Keep me posted. Keep me posted. And what that means is I, as the investor, am going to just wait. And I'm not going to put my skin out there, put my neck out there, but I want to keep the option in case you do take off where you'll take my money. Your job as a founder is to create the urgency to get people to act if you are the visionary. If you're playing the visionary where the issue is that you're having something that's ahead of your time, you need to get very good at invoking action. Chad Rigetti, who's one of our graduates, is probably the best person that we've seen do that. He was building a quantum computer, and everybody thought it was a research project, and he had no revenue, he had no monetization traction. And in the beginning, people were saying, oh, great idea, but I think it's a little early. Just keep me posted. Keep me posted. Chad ended up raising $64 million, okay? And it's actually an interesting counterpoint versus others. And the way that he did that was he created this momentum where it wasn't about whether or not this was going to occur. He made it an inevitability. It was just whether or not that VC wanted to jump on. And the way that that shift has to happen is that the VC has to understand that if this does work, if this is not a double or a triple, this is a 100x return. And so the fear of timing, that I might lose my money, has to be overwhelmed by the opportunity that's there and the fact that if you don't move now, others are going to move before you. And you need to build that momentum. So that is what's critical is if you are the visionary, is that you need to instill the fear of missing out. And you need to drive a process where your biggest currency is not your traction, it's the fact that you only have room for 1 or 2 major investors in your round, and if they don't invest now, they can't just be kept posted. Somebody else is going to move, and you need to have that momentum. You need to have, and there's a little bit of this inertial energy where they have to be, it's an emotional thing where they have to understand that you are dead set on having this thing take off. Sorry.
No, that's
okay.
great. Thank you. SC, I'm going to piggyback off of that, and please add what you want to. But one thing I'm curious is, a large part of being that first mover is building your brand. How do people find you? How do you get seen? Would love for you to talk a little bit about that, and then also touch on any of you, which is, how do you balance getting people on board, getting people excited, creating that FOMO, while also doing your core job, which is building the company?
Yes. So I will answer the branding question, and then I will also answer Ravi's. You and I may have some disagreement on the FOMO, but in good sports. How you build your brand, right? How you build that excitement for people to follow you. First of all, let's not be mistaken. This is a sales job, right? So if you want to be a great CEO, I encourage you to read every possible book you can on sales, because that's your job. And I know in Silicon Valley it can be perceived as a dirty word. It's not. You want to be successful, be good at sales. You want to raise your brand. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, like 3 steps. First thing is you join the conversation. You are an active participant in your field of interest, whether it's enterprise software, whether it's curing cancer, whether it's offering toys for kids. I don't care, but join the conversation by tweeting, by getting to know other experts, by joining programs like The Alchemist and others that will give you a group of peers to bounce ideas off. Ideas are never born in a vacuum out of an ivory tower. Second step, shape the conversation. So once you know who the key influencers are, once you know who what the key topics are, make sure that you have an opinion on them, that you start interacting with these other fellow experts, right? You aspire to become one of them, or you are already one of them. So shape that conversation, be part of panels, write articles of your own, be guest speakers in classes and stuff like that. And then step number 3, once you have an opinion and you start shaping that conversation, it's time for you to take the driver's seat, right? So whether it's starting a company and saying, I'm going to nail that business opportunity, or I'm going to crack that technological problem, or I'm going to become the person of reference on topic X, Y, and Z, that's when you shape the conversation. And you do that by doing a lot of the things that you heard on this panel. You teach a class, you write a book, you give keynotes, you invest in companies, and you try to put yourself out there in the market as a thought leader. When it comes to timing, for early stage companies, your window of opportunity is really how you have to understand your timing. And I would say what matters is really how quickly you get to traction as opposed to how quickly you get to market. And kind of a rule of thumb, right? A successful company for any venture investor is a kind of let's be honest, like a 5-year horizon. They'll tell you it's 5 to 10, but the expectation is closer to 5. Why? Because it takes always a little bit longer, so 5 turns into 7, maybe 8. So have a sense that a business opportunity for venture is a 5-year opportunity. And then that's sort of your outer bound. And then your inner bound is how long you give yourself to try out an opportunity. And I talk to a lot of founders who say, oh, I have 6 months worth of savings, so I'm just going to start this company. And my first answer is, no, don't. You don't have enough time for that. Because it takes about 18 months to 2 years on average to try an opportunity. Why? Because it's basically 3 sales cycles. The first sale, and assume your sales cycle is 6 to 9 months. That's sort of the average, right? If you don't have an idea, assume 6 to 9 months. Your first sales cycle, you're going to have to find some of these raving fans who are going to say, well, you don't quite yet have a product, but I think you're awesome, and I'll trust you. And yes, you can do a proof of concept with my organization, or yes, I'll let you partner with me, or something like that. Like, I'll trust you from a business perspective. That's your first 6 to 9 months. Most likely, these people are going to be disappointed. Not because of you, but just because when you launch a product, you have surprises, you have to address them, there are hiccups. And it's going to take another full sales cycle to, first of all, address the concerns, and then convince someone else to give you a second chance. And then, hopefully, by then you nail it, and by the time you have nailed it and you have the data point to prove that you have something to show that's demonstrating ROI, traction, results, then you can go to your third category of buyers and sell to them again. And that's when you start to get real traction. So 1 to 3 sales cycle, that's 1.5 to 2 years.
Thank you. Yeah, Joseph, would love for you to jump in on some of these thoughts.
Yeah, so I think that's why I think every case we've seen basically start with entrepreneurs just graduate from college, all the way to full-time serial entrepreneurs. So there's a range of experience. So every time when I try to give a general, I always say, well, you have to look at the situation a little bit differently. And also, it always takes longer than what you anticipated. And so there's some general rules, like 18 months to 2 years. The thing is, you never get the first idea. The first idea that you have it really is the idea that you actually create a product exactly how you think to get into get through the proof of concept and actually get your first paying customer. There's a lot of iterations, and then sometimes pivoting. Going back, actually, the first question I'd like to mention is in terms of the doing solo versus doing as a team. I think when you're in the concept phase, doing solo is okay. Once you have a pretty good idea in terms of what you want to do, I would encourage you start finding a co-founder. I think that's probably why you founded the Founder Stating website, which I subscribe to, because it just extra pair of eyes and also bring different perspective. And then, I don't think you have to specifically look for a opposite sex partner. Sometimes it's just basically gender difference and also cultural difference. So one of the things with Lab 360, unlike some of the other, all 4 partners when we first started, all Chinese Americans. But one of the things that we specifically strive to do is, unlike some of the other China incubator accelerators, we don't particularly give a preference to, you're Chinese American, come in here because, culturally we get it. But we actually have a team from Turkey, team from France. So we really want that, because we understand the dynamics in the Silicon Valley, which is the multicultural and multi-gender type of entrepreneur. So, and that becomes I think the differentiation and the uniqueness for us now. In 28 months, we invested in 20 companies from standing still. We're a brand new startup, right? And people are pretty amazed. And so far, 2 of our startups already got into Series A. So in less than 28 months, 2 went from seed investment to Series A, and that's pretty fast in terms of. And one team actually is a full-time serial entrepreneur CEO. So he really knows a lot of things, and he actually helped in terms of providing guidance to other startup CEOs too.
Great, thank you. And all of you are innovators already and have done that yourself and work with innovators on a daily basis. I would love for you to address the topic a little bit of when you're innovating, sometimes it is all-consuming. Is that okay? Is there somewhere where you have to strike a balance? How do you prioritize? What are kind of daily habits that you make time for while innovating, and your founders that you see kind of things that they make sure they do every day that allows them to be fresh and continue to build really innovative, novel products?
Well, I would say the first step is awareness, is that the best founders have a level of self-awareness where you're aware of where you get your energy from, what fuels you, and what drains you. Your job as a leader is not to do everything. Your job as a leader is to identify, but you're responsible for everything, but you don't need to do everything. So the first thing is to get very clear on what are the necessary things that you need to get done. And there's certain sacred things when you're starting. You have a certain runway. If you get to the end of the runway and you haven't done those things, you just won't take off. You need cash. You have to figure out how you're going to get what the business model or the financing source is going to be, and you need to understand who your key constituents are and that they're served well. But beyond that, there's a whole bunch of activities, and I think the first thing that you need to do is I'll tell you, the founders that succeed aren't the ones that are the smartest or the ones that are the most intense. They're the ones that are present. They actually, you have to be present to win. And a lot of founders just knock themselves out because they just don't sustain. So the key thing in my experience is endurance. And that's a function of knowing where you get your energy and where you don't get your energy, what's draining. And I'm a big fan of not trying to work on your weaknesses, but just focusing on your strengths and then finding other ways for people in areas that you're weak at to take those over. And finding people that are as good in the areas that you're weak in as you are in the areas that you're strong in. So not just finding somebody who's better than you in the stuff that you hate doing, but they need to be as good in that area that you are in the area that you are distinctive in. And then just figuring out how to create a model around that so that you can scale. If you don't do that, you will drown. And so, and unfortunately, one of our biggest female fundraiser, Edith, who just closed an $8 million round from DFJ, she runs centuries, which are these 100-mile runs. And when she'll tell you this, when she demoed on stage, she said she gave the worst demo day presentation of anybody in the class because she's not terribly charismatic, but she knows how to endure. And that's the thing. You just have to be present to win, and she just is a machine. So, yeah.
I was going to plug a little bit because we all carry multiple roles. So another role that I volunteer for an organization called IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineering Association. It's the largest electrical engineering professional association with 440,000 members. And we have a special interest group called Women in Engineering. So one of the things is, so I do have, that's one of my source of finding entrepreneurs. So in terms of innovation, because sometimes hardcore engineers, they will just refine, trying to get the best product. But as the CEO, you need to figure out what's good enough to get your product out there, because the best feedback is paying customers. So you might think all the things that is necessary for you to convince a customer to buy, but sometimes it may not, right? So I think to understand the trade-off of what continuous innovation versus what's good enough, so that you can actually get your business running and start getting some revenue in, and that is how you can also convince investors to raise more money.
Yeah, I would agree that what Ravid said. You want to be present, meaning you want to be focused. And regardless of how you focus, you want to focus on that. Like, how do you actually keep your focus? So I'll share a few personal ways that I keep my focus. I have a sort of an annual routine that's pretty regimented. I'll do a retreat once a year or something like that to really think about, like, what am I going to focus on next year? And I'll write down the resolution, put them in a very prominent place so a lot of people can actually see them and hold me accountable to it. And then I have a weekly focus where I have what I call a shadow calendar, which is, in a perfect world, like, at this time of the day, on this day of the week, this is what I would be doing. And it helps me sort of, arrange, like, make sure I cover the topics that are my priorities. And then I have a daily practice of, yoga, meditation to keep me centered on a daily basis. That's just, my personal example. I constantly tweak that routine. And I encourage you to do the same. Find what works for you. There's probably a combination of, like, kind of medium to long term, really short term, and daily, and then keep tweaking it.
Great. Thank you all, panelists, for your great answers and thoughtful responses. I think that's all the time we have today, but thank you all for attending and for the innovation that is a part of your daily lives. And I know I can probably speak for all of us. We have a ton of respect for the entrepreneurs and founders and innovators that are out there doing all the amazing things you do. So thank you.
Yeah. can I make one more
Yes,
plug?
please. Yes, one
so
more point.
IEEE has a group called Women in Engineering. So and it has it's tied in with some of the programs that Intel, Cisco, and other local organizations here. And every year in May, we have what we call International Leadership Conference. It's in San Jose. So if you go to IEEE website, just look for WIE, stand for Women in Engineering. You will find out a lot more information, and hopefully some of you will come in and attend the event in 2018.
Thank you.